Chapter 1262 The Truth Behind the Enemy. When he realized that the Dark Angel had woken up, Klein only felt his heart tighten and was on full alert. He didn't feel any fear or anxiety. After all, he had already confirmed that the real Dark Angel had returned to the ancient sun god's body. After being betrayed by the existences such as the Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, and the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, he had focused his negative and extreme emotions on his corpse where he was reborn, turning into the true creator. He didn't return here, so whatever was left was just a culmination of his psyche and will. Furthermore, he had just communicated with the remnant psyche of Dark Angel Sasra rather normally. He didn't sense any obvious animosity. However, with the City of Silver six-member council elder, Lovia, losing control without any means to resist the moment she opened her eyes, turning into a flowing shadow and eyes hidden behind the shadowy curtain, Klein couldn't help but widen his pupils as he curled the corners of his lips. A strong sense of fear and despair surged through him. It was as though he was watching himself fall into an abyss without any life-saving straw to clutch at. Just waking up from his slumber and not using any Beyond powers or revealing his mythical creature form was enough to make a Sequence 4 demigod of the same pathway lose control on the spot. This was a testimony to how powerful and terrifying his level was. At that moment, all that remained in Klein's mind were the titles he had previously mentioned. The Left Hand of God, the Deputy of Heaven, the King of the Kings of Angels. It wasn't as if Klein had never dealt with a King of Angels before. On the contrary, he had frightened Red Angel Medici and made a deal with the Angel of Imagination Adam. He had obtained the key to enter the palace from the Wisdom Angel, Heraburgen, and had gleaned potion formulas from White Angel Aucuses. He had managed to crack Angel of Fate Ouroboros' cycles of fate in front of him, and had pitted his brains against Angel of Time Amon. He possibly was well deserving of the title as the person who had crossed the most paths with the Kings of Angels for those below Sequence 0. However, in these interactions, he had never fought with the Kings of Angels most of the time. He either relied on the power of Sapphira Castle to instantly escape or cut off contact with them. He had never faced the Kings of Angels or deities in the true sense of the word. The only exception was the time when he was caught by Angel of Time Amon, and he had exchanged blows with him several times in the span of a few days. However, at that time, it was mainly a battle of wits, not a physical battle. The Angel of Time, Amon, had mostly shown the characteristics of a god of trickery. He didn't fully reveal the level and strength of a King of Angels. It was only at the final moment that he revealed it, but the Evernight goddess had used the giant king's son to stop him, preventing him from directly harming or influencing Klein. Even so, whenever Klein encountered the Angel of Time on the way, he would easily finish off the strongest helpers that Klein could summon. It was something that Klein couldn't replicate up to now. It exceeded his peak strength. After all, if he wanted to summon the historical projection of Zeratul, he would be in danger. And at that moment in time, Klein, Colin Iliad, and the sun were facing the King of the Kings of Angels, the malice-filled Deputy of Heaven. He was the left hand of God that instantly caused a Sequence 4 demigod to collapse and lose control. How could such an enemy, with such a level and strength, not make them reel in despair? For a moment, Klein wanted to give up on Derek and the chief of the City of Silver, returning to the world above the grey fog with a single thought, using the Sapphira Castle summoning. By relying on the last miracle and deceit bullets, he could revive outside the forsaken land of the gods. As his thoughts raced, he raised the Staff of the Stars in his hand. At this moment, the shadow that Lovia had broken down in her loss of control stopped flowing. It let out a low voice that was filled with pain but not crazy. "He isn't that strong." As she spoke, the curtain-like shadow split apart, revealing what was hidden behind it. It was a lump of squirming flesh that was nearly 2 meters tall. At the top, there was a pair of pale gray eyes that seemed to be looking down upon the entire world. They were eyes that had remnants of rationality left in them. In other parts of this lump of flesh were arms, thighs, and calves that weren't covered in skin, but sticky blood. They either held up the body or crowded towards the chest in layers, tightly hugging a huge milky white human skull. The shadowy curtain fell again, covering the lump of flesh, turning into her cape. Then, a phantom about 5 to 6 meters tall appeared in front of Lovia. This was the Silver Knight that she had grazed. She could still control herself and attack Dark Angel Sasra. Upon seeing this scene, when Klein and Colin Iliad heard what Lovia had said, they quickly understood what she had meant without needing any further explanation from her. Dark Angel Sasra didn't possess the strength he appeared to possess. He only used the authority of degeneration, and his influence over relatively lower sequences as a high-sequence beyonder of the same pathway to make Lovia's body degenerate, betray, and break down on the spot. As for her own spirit, she still remained conscious and rational. She could still control her own strength to a certain extent. Of course, with the loss of control of her body, large amounts of corruption would corrode her spirit. It wouldn't take long for her to completely go mad. This could be subverted if she could quickly resolve the battle in time, and think of a way to turn her into an evil spirit, surviving in another form. With this knowledge, combined with seeing the first blasphemy slate and his own guesses, Klein had a preliminary understanding of the enemy he was facing. He was a product of the psyche, will, and aura left behind by the Dark Angel, as well as Chaos C's powers which were brought about by the first blasphemy slate. Perhaps there was a bit of the awakening consciousness of the primordial one, in other words, the original creator. There was a small amount of it, a consciousness that was crazy and filled with evil thoughts. This was equivalent to a different type of evil spirit. It was unknown if it was considered a complete angelic evil spirit. And this could be the reason why high-level existences like the true creator, the god of knowledge and wisdom, and Amon's brother didn't personally enter the giant king's palace. Once they approached the primordial one and Chaos C, it was more dangerous for them, the higher their sequences were. Back then, Amon, an entity akin to an error, had used his avatar to lay an ambush in Chernobyl, but he hadn't dared to actually enter Chaos C. All he did was climb down the cliff and hide near Chaos C, pretending that he had climbed out from it. Otherwise, it could very well affect his true body. As for low-sequence beyonders, they were unable to resist the surge released from opening the door to the giant king's residence. Corruption that had accumulated for over 2,000 years. Even if those high-level existences had carefully chosen a suitable Sequence 3 or Sequence 4 demigod to indirectly help them defeat the influence brought about by the corruption and enter the resting grounds hidden in the shadows, without the Sapphira's aura to resist the negative effects of the leaking powers of Chaos C, they wouldn't be able to truly approach the figure left behind by Dark Angel Sassurer and obtain the first blasphemy slate. Therefore, the true creator had tolerated Klein numerous times, only finding an opportunity to corrupt him and force him to meet Dark Angel Sassurer. This was because he was the only viable candidate. By the same logic, the god of knowledge and wisdom, Heraburgen, the angel of imagination, Adam, and the other deities and kings of angels who had an interest in this matter had more or less made some arrangements for Klein, blessing him to a certain extent, pushing him to where he was now. Without any hesitation, Klein outlined an image in his mind through the staff of the stars he raised. Colin Iliad took a step forward and bent down. This city of Silver's chief's body swelled rapidly, once again revealing an incomplete mythical creature form. He became a 5 to 6 meter tall silver knight covered in silver armor, holding a pair of gigantified swords of dawn. Derek was slightly slower than the two experienced demigods. He quickly spread his arms, as though he was hugging the void in front of him. At that moment, two pitch-black flames ignited in the eyes of the awakened Dark Angel Sassurer. He, who shared the height of a giant, immediately pressed down on the armrest by lowering his arm, slowly getting to his feet. The gorgeous accessories on his body hung down one after another as layer after layer of black wings spread open on his back. During this process, the shadow cape on the lump of squirming flesh, Lovia, came alive. It suddenly tightened, fixing her firmly in place. At the same time, Dark Angel Sassurer had silver threads wrapped around him. In front of the black robe with mysterious patterns, silver bolts of lightning appeared out of thin air. They sizzled and intertwined with each other in a thunderous manner. They rapidly extended forward, transforming into a resplendent lightning sea that attempted to drown the entire Shadow Palace. Gong! An illusory chime sounded from a distant history as the melodious sound echoed in the Shadow Palace. An ancient mottled wall clock appeared in front of Klein. Its face was separated into 12 different segments by grayish-white and bluish-black colors. Each segment had different, mysterious, and asymmetric symbols. The 3 fingers, which seemed to be formed by worms of time of different length, began to tick lightly. When the chime rang again, the lightning sea that was rapidly spreading in the Shadow Palace clearly froze. Klein had successfully used the Staff of the Stars to reproduce Angel of Time Amon's Beyonder powers, and the effects were much better than his previous attempts. This made him suspect if he had obtained the approval of the God of Deceit and even obtained blessings from him to a certain degree. It wasn't true that merely simulating Amon's Beyonder powers would gain his notice, but that this king of angels was almost equivalent to the marauder pathway's uniqueness. He was the ruler of the corresponding domain, and he was the wielder of the corresponding authority. He could make a certain level of adjustments to particular powers in advance, enhancing or deleting them. From the looks of it, Amon appeared to be looking forward to seeing Klein enter the giant king's residence to meet Dark Angel Sasra. Therefore, he had adjusted some of his own domain's beyonder powers in advance, and lowered some of his authority in certain aspects, allowing simple replications to achieve a better effect. While the Lightning Sea had come to a halt, the Silver Knight soul that Lovia controlled, and Colin Iliad simultaneously stabbed their swords into the ground, creating two invisible barriers. As for Klein, his figure faded and he disappeared. Chapter 1263 The Final Watch. After a short pause, a brilliant silvery white glow continued to stretch out in front of them, completely drowning out the two invisible barriers that shielded Colin Iliad, Derrickburg, and Lovia. The barrier blocking the silver snaking lightning began to violently tremble. A crack that resembled tree branches appeared. As for how long the barrier could last in the lightning storm, that remained a question. At this moment, behind Dark Angel Sasra, there was an area that wasn't covered by the forest of lightning. Klein's figure, in his black trench coat and silk half-top hat, appeared. He was like a precise and cold machine. Without any hesitation, he aimed the staff of the stars at the side of the special evil spirit, quickly outlining all sorts of information related to the beyonder powers in his mind. He had previously performed tests. He couldn't wander too far with the staff of the stars within the giant king's court, so he could only use blink in a tiny vicinity. Therefore, he gave up on the idea of directly sending Dark Angel Sasra out the giant king's court and seizing the opportunity to take the first blasphemy slate and leaving by opening the door. As the various gems on the staff of the stars lit up, Sasra's eyes, which burned with pitch-black flames, suddenly closed. He had been forcibly dragged into a dream by Klein. This was a beyonder power belonging to the Evernight Pathway Sequence 7, but the one that Klein replicated had belonged to the version which the Evernight Cloister's matron, the servant of concealment Ariana, had used. The beyonder power of pulling someone into a dream performed at the angel level. In the hazy dream world, Dark Angel Sasra wore a black robe with complicated symbols embroidered with silver threads and adorned with accessories. He had appeared in a desolate moor. His eyes remained ice-cold, unlike the dull and lifeless eyes of most beyonders when they were in dreams. The Spectator Pathway also belonged to the Chaos Sea Pathway, and its Sequence 5 and Sequence 3 were Dreamwalker and Dreamweaver respectively. Moments later, Sasra's pupils turned golden and vertical. His giant figure faded away as a layer of abnormally thick shadows appeared in front of him. This shadow completely blocked Sasra, making it possible to vaguely make out a pair of eyes hidden behind the curtain. In the blink of an eye, the curtains parted, revealing an indescribable color, like a sea that seemed to contain all secrets. Boom! When Klein, the conjurer of the dream, saw this scene, his mind erupted with thoughts before he could analyze the details. It was as though his brain was a boiling pot of wheat porridge. The corners of his mouth curled up instinctively, and most of his virtual persona disintegrated. He nearly let out a tragic cry as transparent maggots under his left cheek began to drill out one by one. The meat tendrils on his right face grew more and more obvious, becoming thinner and thinner, approaching that of worms of spirit. The forcefully induced dream disintegrated, and Dark Angel Sasra's consciousness returned to the real world. However, at that moment when the special evil spirit fell into a deep slumber, the sea of lightning faded away. The three demigods of the City of Silver struck back at the same time. Colin Iliad straightened his body and struck out with the Sword of Dawn in his right hand, causing the silvery white light to blink to Sasra's body. As Lovia resisted the restraints of the shadow cloak, she got the Silver Knight evil spirit she grazed to swing its great sword upwards from below, bringing with it a terrifying storm formed from blobs of light. Derek condensed a dazzling white unshadowed spear, thrusting it at the Dark Angel as it left crackling sounds in its wake. At this moment, Sasra's figure emitted infinite pure light, as though he had suddenly become a sun that descended into reality. Under the sun's illumination, the unshadowed spear melted. The hurricane of light calmed down, and the silver beam dimmed. All the latter could do was damage the target's aura, and not deal any harm to his body. The scene of a true deity's descent shocked Lovia and Derek. They couldn't help but bow their heads in worship. As for the Silver Knight evil spirit, it quickly melted under the blazing sunlight and completely evaporated. Suddenly, Sasra's eyes closed once again. Behind his back, with the worms of spirit constantly vanishing on Klein's body, he stubbornly endured the scorching sun's heat and pointed the staff of the stars at the evil spirit, the embodiment of the King of Angels. The beyonder power that he had replicated once again had forcefully pulled Dark Angel Sasra into a dream. However, unlike before, the moment Klein entered the dreamscape, he immediately released his Sapphira Castle's aura, transforming his body into the strange door of light that was tainted with some bluish-black colors. The door of light was made up of countless layers of illusory spherical light. Every spherical light was deep down a transparent and translucent cluster of twisted maggots. Just like him, Dark Angel Sasra revealed the traits of Chaos Sea. First, he turned into a thick and sinister shadow, then he pulled open the curtain, allowing the sea, that contained all colors and something the human language couldn't describe, to appear in the dream. Silently, Sasra and Klein opened their eyes at the same time and raised their bodies slightly across each other. One of them was covered in a faint shadow, while the other's expression was twisted and ferocious. Many worms of spirit crawled across the surface of his body. Klein's virtual persona completely shattered. Seizing this opportunity while Sasra was affected, Lovia, who had the shadow cloak draped over her, blinked her pale gray eyes. She used the 2-meter-tall, squirming flesh to extend. Those skinless legs, which were flowing with bright red liquid, stepped onto the ground at the same time. With the help of the roiling winds, they pounced towards the Dark Angel. A look of madness appeared in her eyes. It didn't appear like it would take long before her spirit body suffered complete corruption, pushing her towards losing control. However, at that moment, Lovia's eyes were filled with more rationality and determination. She knew what she was doing and knew her current state and her subsequent end. Amidst the howling winds, her collapsing body, along with the shadow cloak, landed on Dark Angel Sasra's body. The squirming flesh and blood intruded as the thick shadow rapidly expanded, binding the two figures together. Without waiting for Lovia to speak, Colin Iliad had already understood her intentions. He immediately roared in a low voice, "Attack!" Boom! His two swords tore through the void at the same time, allowing the silver light to surge at Lovia and Dark Angel Sasra, who were embroiled with each other. Upon hearing the chief's words, Derek bit his lip and spread open his arms halfway. The palace that was shrouded in the shadows suddenly lit up as huge balls of light filled with holy flames appeared out of thin air. They enveloped the Dark Angel and Lovia within, quickly melting them and igniting their flesh. Flaring sun. Amid this bright glow, Lovia's pale gray eyes revealed the pain that she acutely felt. Her voice echoed in an ethereal manner. "I have never betrayed the City of Silver." Before she could finish her sentence, the flesh in the shadow cloak she used to envelop Dark Angel Sasra's body swelled up. Boom! Lovia's collapsing body was sent flying before she fell to the ground. Her shadow tore apart, turning into a thin illusory veil that slowly floated down. Dark Angel Sasra turned into a pitch-black and sticky sea filled with an aura of degeneration. It swallowed the remaining silvery white light and flaring sun, reducing it to nothing. He immediately returned to his previous appearance, a giant dressed in a gorgeous black robe with silver threads. However, the black wings on his back had thinned significantly. At the same time, his pupils turned vertical and turned golden. A violent but surreal wind surged around him, and filled every corner of the Shadow Palace with all sorts of thoughts. Mind deprivation. Derek's recently condensed, unshadowed spear disappeared. He stood rooted to the ground in shock. Although Colin Iliad had a strong will, he suffered from the madness, cruelty, and bloodlust of an incomplete mythical creature form. All he could do was divert some attention to resist the influence, so as to prevent himself from losing control. Just as Klein calmed down and allowed his worms of spirit to burrow back into his body, he suffered an intense fear brought about by mind deprivation. His body instantly convulsed, preventing him from using the Staff of the Stars. Lovia's body had already collapsed, and with her soul almost completely corrupted, she was in a worse-off state. She rolled on the ground struggling, leaving behind blood-colored sticky liquid. At this moment, Dark Angel Sasra raised his left hand. The golden colors in his eyes was replaced by two blazing white suns. Rays of holy flames fell down one after another, striking Lovia's body, destroying her soul and purifying her flesh. Lovia's aura rapidly dissipated as her pale gray eyes lost their luster. Her body, which had collapsed into a lump of flesh and blood, curled up. The skinless arms covered in bright red liquid wrapped the milky white large human skull tightly in front of her chest and pressed it under her. Under the blazing sunlight, the holy flames burned. Lovia maintained this posture, not allowing herself to move, nor allowing the human skull to be revealed and receive any damage. Another column of light shot down. Lovia's body couldn't help but bounce up, but she still huddled there writhing. Finally, this lump of distorted, disgusting, squirming flesh stopped moving and covered the surface of the human skull. It was dark, dull, and damaged. During the Dark Angel Sasrar's act of murdering Lovia, Klein quickly recovered from the effects of mind deprivation by using his unique traits and past experience. He felt an uncontrollable sense of despair towards this battle. They had used all their strength, but they had only slightly injured the evil spirit. Now that they had lost a demigod, the situation that followed would probably be even worse. What should I do? As Klein used creeping hunger to change his position, his thoughts raced in search of any possible weaknesses. It's intrinsically an evil spirit. An evil spirit. Just as his figure appeared elsewhere, he suddenly had an idea. He cast his gaze on the grayish-white stone slate on the iron-black throne. Some evil spirits had beyonder characteristics, but most of them didn't. The source of their powers stemmed from other places, such as the spirit world. The existence of evil spirits needed something to rely on. This might be the territory that he was born in, or perhaps something special. The common point was that evil spirits could use them to connect to the spirit world or even the underworld to obtain the power to maintain their existence. And this evil spirit that originated from Dark Angel Sasrar might even be mixed with some of the will of the primordial. Where did his powers come from? This was the forsaken land of the gods, and the connection with the spirit world was sealed. It was almost completely severed, making the powers difficult to be effectively utilized. Klein could teleport only by relying on the uniqueness of a divine kingdom or the divine kingdom's embryonic form. As for the giant king's court, it was clearly unable to provide the powers of the spectator, the sun, the hanged man, reader, and tyrant pathways. The traits the Dark Angel formerly possessed clearly belonged to the true creator at present, making it not present here. Therefore, the answer to the source of the evil spirit's power was very simple. Chaos C. In the Shadow Palace, the only thing directly connected to Chaos C was the blasphemy slate. When Klein cast his gaze at the iron-black throne, he noticed that the City of Silver's chief, Colin Iliad, had also glanced over. Chapter 1264. Succeeding. There was no need for any communication. Just from this sudden locking of eyes, Klein knew that Colin Iliad had the same thoughts as him. He didn't hesitate to flip the black staff embedded with many gems and point it at himself. In the next second, it was as if Klein's body was a sketch that had met an eraser. It was wiped away inch by inch, and he quickly disappeared. This was the power of concealment, one that also came from the leader of the ascetics of the Church of Evernight, Ariana. As the power of concealment that was replicated by the Staff of the Stars was definitely much weaker than the original version, and the evil spirit's level was rather high, Klein didn't attempt to use it on Dark Angel Sasrar. Instead, he targeted himself. At the same time that he was concealed, Colin Iliad fused into the faint light that illuminated everything in the Shadow Palace with his two swords of dawn. Around Dark Angel Sasrar, who was dressed in a silver-threaded black robe, silver beams lit up one after another. Colin struck the evil spirit from different angles, forming a tornado that swept upwards. During this process, the gigantified Colin Iliad didn't appear at all. Furthermore, he hid his malicious intent, making it impossible for the enemy to determine where his next attack would come from. Derek Berg recovered from the shock and quickly condensed bright white, unshadowed spears, as he wildly thrust them forward. Amidst the crackling sounds, the unshadowed spears were either blocked by the black armor formed by the aura of degeneration, or by the layered silvery white sphere of lightning. He failed to truly hurt Dark Angel Sasrar, but it effectively affected his opponent's actions. While the two City of Silver demigods were holding back that special evil spirit, Klein, who was in a concealed state, approached the iron-black throne. In his concealed state, he saw veiled scenes that were covered in a dark fog. He could only roughly tell where he was and what the surrounding objects were. He was unable to exert any influence on the outside world. If not for this, the moment he entered the concealed state, he could secretly control Sasrar's spirit body threads. It would be a method impossible to fend against. After rapidly approaching the iron-black throne, Klein ended his concealed state, allowing his figure to instantly appear to the right of the target. Following that, he aimed the staff of the stars at the grayish-white ancient stone slab. Ignoring the contents on it, Klein quickly outlined a very familiar Beyonder power in his mind. Boom! Silver bolts of lightning shot out with a strong destructive aura, striking the first blasphemy slate. This was the lightning storm power from the sea god's scepter. Boom! Amidst the silver light that illuminated the surrounding area, an illusory light that was almost invisible appeared between the first blasphemy slate and Dark Angel Sasrar. It was difficult to describe the exact color, but under the terrifying lightning's pandemonium, they evaporated and broke apart. Pure beams of light shot out from Sasrar's body, leaving no darkness in the Shadow Palace. Nothing else could hide. Unshadowed Domain. The nearly 6-meter-tall Colin Iliad appeared in his silver armor. Together with Klein, layers of blazing halos pushed them away into the distance. The attacks of Derek's unshadowed spears and flaring sun were also blocked by these corporeal halos. Right on the heels of that, Dark Angel Sasrar's eyes were dyed with a brass sheen. In each of them, an illusory river that shimmered with waves of light appeared, circling the first blasphemy slate and his figure. The river flowed upstream as the illusory light that had evaporated and severed appeared once again and connected to it. The damage that Klein had painstakingly inflicted was quickly returned to normal. The cycle of fate, the rebooting of all things. Sasrar raised his left hand and condensed a deep black scepter. He then used his brass-like eyes to sweep across the demigods present. He said in a deep but magnificent voice, "I'm omniscient and also omnipotent." As his voice echoed in the air, both Klein and Colin Iliad didn't waver at all. They either blinked or moved at high speeds, not giving the terrifying evil spirit a chance to lock onto them. They also attempted to launch a new wave of attacks. However, Klein didn't dare to forcefully pull the Dark Angel into a dream again, because if he was attacked by the aura and power of Chaos Sea again, he might lose control immediately. Elsewhere, Derek covered his body with a layer of pure light, forming holy armor. At that moment, a pitch-black flame burned in Sasrar's brass eyes. His voice turned evil and sinister, carrying a strong sense of degeneration. "Blasphemer, die!" Klein's body, heart, and soul suddenly sank. He felt as though he was about to die. His consciousness turned blurry as his energy evaporated. His flesh began to wither inch by inch. Colin Iliad was slightly better than him. He only felt his body grow heavy as his life slipped away uncontrollably. The madness that came from his incomplete mythical creature form grew stronger. Derek, who was farthest from Dark Angel Sasrar, emitted bright bouts of sunlight, helping him quickly escape from his trance. He then opened his mouth. "God says it's ineffective." The feeling of death instantly dissipated a little, allowing Klein and Colin Iliad to barely find themselves. Tap, tap, tap. The giant-like Colin Iliad rushed towards Dark Angel Sasrar. Along the way, he kept changing his position, dodging unstoppable dark, sharp beams. In the blink of an eye, he had already closed in on the target. Dark Angel Sasrar immediately pointed the pitch-black scepter ahead, causing Colin Iliad's body to produce a shadow within the unshadowed domain. The shadow came alive as it followed the legs of the City of Silver Chief, swallowing him. Gong! A distant bell sounded as though it had pierced through history. The ancient mottled stone wall clock appeared in front of Klein once again, bringing with it a brief respite. As he made use of this respite, Klein used the Staff of the Stars to reproduce the unshadowed spear and cast it at Colin Iliad's shadow. The blazing light exploded, dispersing the shadow like the sun. Colin's face under his visor twisted, but he didn't hesitate at all. He jumped up, appearing right above Dark Angel Sasrar and cleaved down with his two swords of dawn. Gong! Sasrar seemed to see through Colin Iliad's intention. He raised the black scepter horizontally and blocked the other party's cleaving strike. Suddenly, Colin Iliad's body melted. He became sticky, heavy mercury, surging down like waves, instantly drowning Dark Angel Sasrar. It was as if he was wearing a set of full-body silver armor, without any gaps in between. Colin wanted to suffocate the entity inside. Sasrar's actions were immediately restricted. Taking this opportunity, Klein's figure suddenly turned transparent as he appeared beside the iron-black throne. Teleportation. Then, he raised the Staff of the Stars and conjured a certain Beyonder power. It was one of the core powers of the Marauder pathway. Theft. Just as he had expected, the theft was carried out rather successfully. It was as though the current Sequence 2 angel, Pallas Zoroast, had personally taken action. The light that connected the Dark Angel and the first blasphemy slate separated from Sasrer, shifting to Klein. At that instant, Klein's thoughts nearly exploded. The indescribable color and form appeared in front of him once again. It was abnormally illusory, as though it was a sea containing all secrets. Just as he was about to lose control due to the aura and powers of the Chaos Sea, the parts of his body that were corrupted by the true creator suddenly experienced a change. They seemed to be attracted by a strong attractive force as they rapidly gathered together and began to take over the nearly invisible light, making him stop at the edge of a proverbial cliff. Indeed, as Klein sighed, he tried his best to restrain his mind that had been inundated. He was temporarily unable to move. Bang! 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 The silver armor covering Dark Angel Sasra's body began to crack in the darkness. These beams of light that came from the cull of spiritual flesh tore out, turning the mercury into tattered pieces and flying far away. With a loud snap, the mercury fell to the ground, regathering into the form of Colin Iliad. There were gaping holes in the chief's body. Inside it was a black, frozen, decadent, and illusory aura. At that moment, the illusory layered black wings on Sasrar's back dimmed significantly. His eyes had once again worn a brass sheen, a faint flickering illusory river appearing in them. Upon seeing this scene, Colin Iliad instinctively recalled what had happened. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, he relied on his intuition to charge out without hesitation, filled with great resolve. His body ignited a transparent flame, emitting the bright light of dawn. These beams of light came from his soul, his body, his beyonder characteristic, and the two swords he struck out merged together, turning into a raging violent storm that swept out. At this moment, Colin Iliad's eyes were filled with the light of dawn he created, and the towering figure dressed in a gorgeous black robe with illusory black wings. Bearing the light, he charged towards the light. Sasrer. The terrifying hurricane of light instantly enveloped the Dark Angel, tearing at his body, interrupting the beyonder powers that he was about to use. It made the evil spirit that had lost the source of its power rapidly fade away amidst the fragments of light. When the light dissipated, holes appeared on Dark Angel Sasrar's body. The layers of wings on his back were spread out, but he failed to borrow any strength. Colin Iliad immediately turned into sticky mercury, once again covering most of the evil spirit's body, restricting his movements. Then the City of Silver chief shouted in a low voice to Derek Berg, just like he did when he was facing Lovia, "Attack!" Chapter 1265 Warrior, Attack. Upon hearing the chief's words, Derek froze for a moment before instinctively spreading his arms. During this process, his vision blurred and he let out an extremely repressed voice from the depths of his throat. A blob of light covered in holy flames descended out of thin air, devouring the figures of Dark Angel Sasrar and Colin Iliad. Before the blast of light exploded, Derek pulled back his arm, forming a bright white and pure unshadowed spear in his palm. Amidst the crackling sounds, the long spear of light tore through the holy flames and accurately hit the evil spirit's head. Dazzling light burst out, completely covering the entire area. Even the crazed Klein couldn't avoid it, as he was too close to it. He couldn't help but close his eyes. His face contorted into a grimace. He felt as though his worms of spirit were evaporating one after another. The connection between the blasphemy slate and the true creator's power of corruption had been greatly purified before they could fully be established. The sun seemed to rise in the sky. Dark Angel Sasrar's indistinct figure appeared, twisting and distorting amidst the blinding white light and holy flames, melting away. Then, the shadow that covered the walls, stone pillars, and tiles began to disintegrate, revealing inches of orange-red light. The palace hidden in the residence of the giant king finally failed to sustain its existence in the real world. It no longer blocked out the influence of the outside world. This also meant that the special evil spirit that had lost contact with Chaos Sea had truly been cleansed. Just as the Shadow Palace began to collapse without completely disintegrating, an invisible force finally pierced through the barrier, causing a minute amount of it to descend. This caused the corrupting nature gathered inside Klein's body to increase in intensity. They protruded out from his chest, turning into a black ball of flesh. The flesh immediately broke free from Klein's body, severing all invisible connections with him. It quickly squirmed and grew, turning into a gigantic shadow hand. It followed the illusory light between itself and the first blasphemy slate, and it grabbed the item. At the same time, in the ruins of the battlefield of the god's dream world, in front of the projection of the giant king's residence, dressed in a pointed hat and a classic black robe, Amon sat on the tall grayish-white railing, with his back facing the orange-red path that separated the clouds. He leisurely looked at the grayish-blue door covered with golden nails. It was a mystery as to how long he had been waiting there for. Suddenly, he adjusted the monocle on his right eye and easily jumped down the railing, arriving at the door of the giant king's residence's projection. The power of Chaos C is beginning to fade. I can use the bug in all of this to directly enter. As he smiled, he reached out his right hand and pressed it on the door's shadow. His figure immediately softened and lost its corporeal feeling before he entered the door like a stream of light. Backlund, somewhere on the battlefield. With short blonde hair and dark green eyes, Crestet Casimir genuflected on the ground, stabbing a pure white bone sword that wasn't more than 1 meter long in length, in front of him to support himself. His body was covered with charred holes and cracks that went straight through his body. His teeth were protruding and sharp, like that of a beast. This high-ranking deacon, whose consciousness was beginning to blur, struggled to shift his gaze from the weak enemy who wasn't far away towards the sky. The orange sunset had partially invaded the dark night. Crestet Casimir tried his best to pull out his bone sword and stand up to fight. He wanted to be a night watcher to the very end, but his arm trembled violently as his breathing weakened. In the astral world, in an endless and silent darkness filled with moonflowers and night vanilla, suddenly, orange beams of light shone into the kingdom, causing a portion of the area to return to dusk. One by one, the plants withered. In the desolate dusk, a gigantic mountain-like figure walked out. His limbs were abnormally long, and he wore tattered silver armor. His face was covered by a helmet's visor, only revealing a blob of orange light. He held an exaggerated sword in his hand, causing the tip to naturally hang down, touching the dark ground. As the terrifying giant walked forward, step by step, the sword continued to be dragged across the darkness, causing the ground to split apart as dusk froze. Deep in the darkness, an equally large figure pulled out a long sickle. She was wearing a black dress that was layered but not complicated. It was adorned with countless resplendent lights, as though they were stars that dotted the night sky. Near her ribs and waist, 2 pairs of arms grew out. Their surfaces were covered in short deep black hair. In her 6 arms, 2 carried the huge black sickle that appeared heavy. Another 2 hands held a crimson moon. Out of the hands she had left, one was empty, while the other held an ancient accessory forged from gold. The accessory looked like a slender bird with pale white flames surrounding it. Within its bronze eyes, there were layers of light, forming numerous illusory doors. The giant wasn't surprised by such a scene. The speed of his stride sped up, gradually approaching that of a charge. He dragged his sword against his surroundings, which were a mixture of darkness and dusk, producing glimmers of the pure light of dawn. At this moment, the moonflowers and night vanilla to the side suddenly grew in size, growing wildly. Soon, they resembled trees that had lived in a primitive forest for more than 1,000 years. They were densely packed, blocking out the sky. Amongst these trees, a figure twined by deep green vines and adorned with various herbs and flowers appeared. She was also as huge as a mountain and had a voluptuous figure. Her dress fluttered as she carried an illusory baby. The moment the figure descended, she followed the sunset giant and flitted towards the humanoid demonic wolf that was dragging a huge black sickle. In the palace where shadows were falling apart, although some of the corruption had left Klein's body, making him no longer need to worry about any latent danger in this aspect, this was equivalent to culling many of his worms of spirit. He couldn't help but let out a low gasp as transparent and twisted maggots crawled out of his writhing face. They had mysterious patterns on them, and his mind was like a lake that had a boulder thrown into it. He was momentarily unable to calm down. At that moment, a familiar figure appeared in his eyes which became bloodshot due to the pain. It was the Angel of Time, Amon, who wore a monocle and a pointed hat. Amon smiled at him, scaring him into having the thought of returning to Sapphira Castle immediately. Although this would suck for the son, Klein felt that he would have the ability to save him due to the angel powers from being in Sapphira Castle. After all, the influences from the outside world could now enter this area. But in a blink of an eye, the Angel of Time cast his gaze towards the grayish-white blasphemy slate. He cast it towards the shadow hand that was saturating and growing stronger with the collapse of the land of slumber. Amon immediately raised his right hand and adjusted his right eye's monocle. The crystal monocle turned dark, as though it was mixed with countless colors in an indescribable manner. An illusory, terrifying, tumultuous sea appeared in front of Amon. This blasphemer had released some unknown power he had stolen from somewhere at some point in time. Or perhaps it was some power of convergence. The blasphemy slate suddenly vibrated and emitted a buzzing sound as though it was alive. It broke free from the remaining light that wasn't stable enough between the shadow hand, and it threw itself at Amon. Klein, who had just recovered from the pain from his fear and horror, couldn't believe his eyes as they dilated. The first blasphemy slate actually didn't choose the true creator of the Hanged Man pathway, and instead sought refuge with the Marauder pathway's Angel of Time. After a momentary daze, he vaguely understood the whole story. Amon's true body has wandered the forsaken land of the gods for more than 1,000 years before entering Chernobyl, doing so in search of the history from the second all the way to before the first epoch. He must have hovered at the edge of Chaos Sea, and had done some dangerous research. He had stolen some traits, and now, he is only using the release of this stolen trait to attract the blasphemy slate. Simply put, this King of Angels had prepared for this for a very long time. As for the true creator, he is unable to completely descend. He has to wait for the Dark Angel's land of slumber to completely collapse. But the problem is, why would Amon steal the first blasphemy slate? It's useless for him. He has no way of transferring to the spectator, reader, tyrant, sun, and hanged man pathways. Could it be just because it's fun? When the deities and his brother are plotting for this blasphemy slate, he suddenly intervenes and runs away. But isn't it more important for him to capture me? As Klein remained puzzled with Amon's goals, he slowly retreated, opening his eyes wider, trying his best to pry into the secrets on the surface of the blasphemy slate. He wanted to memorize the potion formula he needed. Sequence 1. Attendant of Mysteries. As soon as the corresponding words entered his eyes, Amon reached out with his left hand and grabbed the blasphemy slate. Then, he suddenly turned around and pressed his right hand on the grayish-blue door that was still covered with a small amount of shadows. The figure wearing a pointed hat and a classic black robe immediately turned illusory as he tore through the door and vanished. The shadow hand, which was partially formed by Klein's corruption, rapidly expanded amidst the collapse of the land of slumber. Finally, it turned into a black shadow and chased after Amon, rushing out of the closed door. In the next second, all the shadows disappeared. The orange-red light illuminated the palace that the giant king once lived in. In front of the iron-black throne, on the platform that was illuminated by the light of dusk, Colin Iliad's figure appeared. He was wearing a tattered silver armor, revealing several old scars on his face. He sat there quietly, like a warrior who had just finished his last battle. His two swords had already crumbled, and he had stopped breathing. However, Klein could sense that there were still remnants of his will and psyche. The former couldn't bear to just dissipate without delivering his last words. At the bottom of the stairs, Derek saw this scene. With his eyes red, he ran closer and stumbled, acting nothing like a demigod. He quickly knelt beside Colin Iliad and shouted, his voice going soft, "Chief!" Chapter 1266. Lie for a demigod beyonder. They experienced a qualitative change due to their powerful souls. Even in death, their psyche could persist for some time. Unless this was circumvented due to an enemy deliberately destroying it, a high-sequence beyonder, who continued having a strong desire or unresolved matters during their state of death, could have their remnant will last longer. As such, he could slowly assimilate the surrounding areas, allowing it to mix with the spirit world, and even the underworld, so as to turn it into an evil spirit. Therefore, although Colin Iliad had stopped breathing, he was still able to hear Derek's cry while sitting at the top of the ancient god's staircase in tattered silver armor. He turned his head to look at the underaged demigod before smiling. Compared to the elders of the past, it's a form of luck for Lovia and myself to die here. Upon hearing this, Derek gaped his mouth, wanting to say something, but felt something pressing down on his heart, blocking his throat. Not far away, Klein raised the Staff of the Stars and attempted to use Will Septon's reboot to save Colin Iliad. However, he failed several times in a row. Even the successful attempt didn't have the ability to reverse everything. The effects were clearly inferior to the originals, and it involved a uniqueness, Amon's true body had descended. He's already dead, so he can't even be turned into a marionette. He can only consider turning into an evil spirit, but there's almost no evil spirit that can maintain their humanity. Even Dark Angel Sasra failed to do so. The only exception is the Red Angel Medici trio. But that was only after they left their territory and went to Bansi Harbor. This chief doesn't seem willing to take this route. To the residents of the City of Silver, becoming an evil spirit is undoubtedly a curse. Klein sighed and cast his gaze elsewhere to observe the giant king's palace that had its shadows recede. Colin Iliad examined Derek's face and sighed. When you return, you'll be a member of the 6-member council. I know. Relative to your age, this is a very heavy responsibility, but everyone in the City of Silver has to be prepared to shoulder everyone's fate. Derek nodded and said with a nasal voice, Yes, Your Excellency. Colin Iliad revealed an amiable smile. Don't be worried that they'll misunderstand this. I'll tell you a secret. Currently, in the City of Silver, only Wait and I know of it. When you get back, tell this to Wait immediately. He will understand that Lovia's and my death has nothing to do with you. Otherwise, you will not obtain this secret from me. Having said that, Colin Iliad looked up at Gehrman Sparrow and nodded gently. From today onwards, everyone in the City of Silver can freely change their faith to Mr. Fool. Derek wasn't excited at all. He nodded heavily, indicating that he understood. Colin Iliad immediately retracted his gaze. A layer of solemnity and bitterness appeared on his clearly exhausted face. That secret is related to the second god-level sealed artifact of our City of Silver. It's called Gift of the Land. Derek wiped his eyes with his arm and listened attentively to the chief's description. Colin Iliad sighed and continued, It's precisely because of this sealed artifact that black-faced grass can grow around the City of Silver, preventing us from completely sinking into the Dark Ages. Derek's pupils dilated as the sadness in his heart eased. He remembered very clearly that the textbooks mentioned the discovery of black-faced grass as the key turning point in the history of the City of Silver. He believed that if there was no such safe and harmless staple food, then the City of Silver would have long become a playground for monsters. At that instant, Derek thought of many things. He finally understood why the mushrooms that Mr. World had given had undergone a huge transformation in the City of Silver, one that was different from the original description. Colin Iliad's gaze swept across his face, and his voice suddenly turned deep. It's precisely because of this that we are burdened with the fate of being cursed. Only people who are killed by their immediate family wouldn't become a terrifying evil spirit. Cornucopia has a price. Derek's expression froze. Murdering his parents left a wound that could never heal in his heart. He had always blamed the corresponding curse on this land that had been forsaken by the gods. But now, the chief had told him the truth, which was unlike what he imagined. The curse gave them the food they relied on for survival. The grizzled and exhausted-looking Colin Iliad's eyes glazed over as he seemed to recall killing his father, mother, brother, sister, eldest son, youngest son, daughter, and eldest grandson. His voice became fleeting. Lovia once said that a dying person would not transform into an evil spirit after leaving the City of Silver. Back then, I didn't tell her that this was the truth. As the Gift of the Land's range is huge, most people who are about to die are unable to leave the corresponding region in time. This is a secret that only the chief can grasp. I tried my best exploring and fighting, hoping that future generations wouldn't have to suffer such pain. The chief of the City of Silver, who was clearly advanced in his years, slowly exhaled. Without giving Derek a chance to make a promise, he seemed to recall something as he said, Also, you mustn't fully believe the situation of the Rose redemption that is recorded in that palace. Klein stopped scrutinizing his surroundings as he revealed a slightly lost expression. Colin Iliad added in a deep voice, Earth Mother cannot be Giant Queen Omabella. Omabella has long died. Her corpse is in the City of Silver, and more precisely, it's the Gift of the Land. When Klein heard this, his pupils dilated as a chill ran down his spine. The real Giant Queen had long died in the City of Silver and became a sealed artifact. Then, who is the one currently masquerading as Earth Mother? In the kingdom that was covered in moonflowers and night vanilla, the sunset giant's sword struck the heavy, pitch-black sickle and froze in midair. In the darkness that had been destroyed by the intense battle of the gods, time seemed to come to a halt. Be it the giant wearing tattered armor who was bathing in the dusk, or the humanoid demonic wolf with 6 arms, they seemed to become a part of an oil painting. Everything stood on the spot, maintaining their previous posture. However, a dark brown wooden cane had stabbed through the back of the sunset giant, piercing through its heart as it frantically drained the life of the deity, dragging him down in an act of returning it to the land, returning to a mother's embrace. This dark brown wooden staff was held in the hands of the giant-like, voluptuous woman. It formed a deep autumn scene with the withered flowers, grass, and mushrooms. The sunset giant slowly turned his head and looked at the woman who was carrying the baby in one hand. He said in pain, "Lead." At this moment, the dress-wearing, demonic wolf, with the head of a female human, let out a chuckle. The bird-shaped golden accessory in her hand flew out and accurately pierced through the gap of the sunset giant's visor. Then, she threw the crimson moon in her two other hands at the voluptuous woman. In the next second, a portion of the sunset giant's body collapsed. An orange-red sunset pierced through the serene darkness and landed in the real world. Some landed on the battlefield, causing countless soldiers to die. Some crushed the mountains, creating a lake that made all living creatures age. Some fused with some lucky creatures, turning them into crazy and powerful monsters, while others enveloped the great twilight hall outside St. Milam. The solidified orange light was extinguished. In the Amantha mountain range, outside the Cathedral of Serenity, Abomination Sua and other mythical creatures, who were helping Fasak and Intis Angel's attack, seemed to sense something. The battle came to a halt. After the bloodshot eyes growing on the pitch-black tree rolled once, Abomination Sua immediately entered the void and escaped into the spirit world. In the outskirts of Backland, in a small cathedral that no one paid attention to, a golden-bearded pious priest wearing a simple white robe opened his eyes. They revealed a childlike innocence and purity. He calmly took out a golden potion and opened the lid, pouring the liquid inside into his mouth. The war ended just like that. If Audrey hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she never would have believed that the war would end just like that. After the dark night swallowed the orange dusk and faded away by itself, the silver knight in front of her seemed to suffer a heavy mental blow. Even after recovering and composing himself, he didn't continue attacking his enemy. He fled in a rather sorry and perplexed state. Just like this silver knight, the angels and saints of the Fasak and Intis allied forces fled one after another. As for the Beyonders that formed the backbone of the army, they collapsed in an uncontrollable manner. However, on Lone's side, the demigods low and mid-sequence Beyonders, and ordinary soldiers didn't attempt to pursue them. This was because they were equally confused, perplexed, and puzzled. Audrey walked back into the city and saw the surviving Backland residents coming out of their houses, shelters, or hiding spots, one after another. They stared blankly at the scene which resembled a primeval forest. They didn't cheer, shout, or vent their emotions. Their expressions were numb, and their eyes were vacant. They didn't know how and why the disaster had suddenly ended. There was no lack of people who had once been saved by the Charity Foundation. Many of them looked familiar to Audrey, but their condition wasn't much different from when those who queued up to collect food. Audrey silently observed this scene before returning to Empress Burrow and back to her villa. She saw her father, mother, elder brother, butler, servants looking out of the window in confusion, just like the citizens on the street. For some reason, a sentence suddenly flashed across Audrey's mind. Dying, he knew not his executor. Surviving, he knew not the circumstances. An orange dusk calmed the lightning storm that blazed with frequent bolts of lightning. It sank into the dark blue sea with an indiscernible bottom, nearly swallowing the dawn with it. Queen Mystic had used her other Grade 0 sealed artifact in time, allowing the ship to avoid a terrifying disaster. She frowned slightly as if she had sensed something. However, her expression eased up immediately, allowing the Dawn to continue moving forward on an unsafe sea route. It was to engage in all kinds of dangerous battles with strong winds, huge waves, lightning, and sea monsters. In the dark environment, Bernadette's gaze seemed to penetrate through many obstacles, allowing her to see the light that she was chasing after. No matter how many obstacles she faced, she would not stop her approach. On the staircase in the giant king's residence, which was covered in orange light. After telling Derek the secret, Colin Iliad said to Derek, "Go. Open that door. I want to see what the sunlight outside is like." "Yes." The rims of Derek's eyes reddened once again. He pursed his lips tightly and stood up. He put down the hammer in his hand, and under the encouraging gaze of Klein, he steadily circled around the iron-black throne and arrived in front of the grayish-blue door which depicted the sunset. Derek stared at it for a second, bent down, stretched out his hands, and pressed them against the sides of the door. Then, he strained his muscles and pushed hard. At that moment, he seemed to see his parents, his deceased teammates, like Joshua and Antiona, Lovia in a purple-patterned black robe, and the grizzled Colin Iliad. They stood beside him and pressed their hands against the door, pushing the grayish-blue door with him. Beads of water streamed down Derek's face as a heavy creaking sound echoed in his ears. A crack appeared, letting golden sunlight flood in. The gap grew bigger and bigger, and a golden sea gradually appeared in Derek's eyes, presenting itself in front of Colin Iliad's eyes. Upon seeing this scene, the corners of Colin Iliad's lips twitched slightly as he bathed in the warm sunlight. The corners of his lips pulled up slightly as he revealed a faint smile and a faint yearning, his body evaporating bit by bit. Light was the meaning to everything. Chapter 1267. Welcome. Beyond the open grayish-blue door, a flight of stone stairs led to a sea that glowed with golden light. This, along with boundless light, once again entered the eyes of the residents of the City of Silver such as Lievel and Candace. As members of the former expedition team, this wasn't the first time they had seen such a scene. Even so, their souls remained deeply shocked as they subconsciously held their breaths. With the Thunder God's roar hammer in hand, Derek stood at the front with his 2-meter-tall, wide-shouldered build. He was silent. Nearly a minute later, Lievel probed, "Elder Berg, when are we leaving?" He was a Sequence 5 guardian who stood at nearly 2.5 meters tall. This made his limbs' physical proportions slightly abnormal. Derek stared at the sea that was rippling with golden spots for a few seconds before saying, "Wait a while longer." At this moment, several days had passed since he opened the door. He had led the expedition team back to the City of Silver with the ashes of the chief and elder Lovia, as well as their characteristics and sealed artifacts. He had also used the secret to obtain the trust of the current chief of the 6-member council, Waite Chermont. This time, Derek led the 20 City of Silver Beyonders to do reconnaissance, so as to find a safe passage to confirm the situation of the outside world. On this matter, he had rejected Mr. World's suggestion of using the Staff of the Stars to directly transfer the entire City of Silver from the forsaken land of the gods. He wanted to use his feet to take in the path of hope. He wanted to remember what the light that the City of Silver had finally found after experiencing 2,000 years of persistence and sacrifice was like. Upon hearing Elder Derek's answer, the members of the expedition team, such as Lievel and Candace, didn't say much. They all took a step back and continued enjoying the scenery. They still didn't trust Derek Berg much. After all, he had a close relationship with outsiders. And the chief and elder Lovia had both died during the previous expedition. Only this unshadowed and that outsider had survived. If not for the 6-member council choosing to believe him, they would definitely be hostile and wary. After an unknown period of time, the shimmering sea was suddenly enveloped by darkness. Deep in the darkness, they could barely make out a thin fog. In the fog, there was a black-pointed cathedral with all sorts of buildings. It gave people the feeling that it was both real and illusory. Derek and company were no stranger to darkness. He instinctively glowed, while those who needed to light up candles did so. They did it hurriedly without any signs of turmoil. After the 21-strong team was protected by light, they looked with curiosity at the town and fleeting pedestrians in the fog, unable to understand what was going on. This wasn't the darkness they were familiar with. At this moment, the naturally glowing Derek raised his left hand and said in a low voice, "Let's set off." Without waiting for his team members to respond, he took the first step through the door and followed the stone steps outside, taking one step after another into the darkness. Everyone exchanged looks, then gritted their teeth. Without falling behind, they followed the newly appointed 6-member council elder, Derek Berg, out of the Giant King's residence. In the rich darkness, as they walked down the stairs, their eyes suddenly lit up. They saw an orange glow and a row of black cloister-like buildings. Is this the outside world? Candace looked around warily and curiously. She realized that all of them had unknowingly walked to the opposite side of the Giant King's court, and were separated by a sea of orange-red from where they were. No. Derek compared the current environment to Mr. World's and Ma'am Hermit's description. He nodded slightly and said, "We still need to wait here for a while. Feel free to find a spot to rest." This unshadowed, who no longer had any hint of adolescence, calmly arranged everything. Lievel looked at the tightly shut black cloister and asked in puzzlement, "Is there no need to explore this place in search of an exit?" There's no need. Derek shook his head. The members of the reconnaissance team didn't ask further, nor did they rest. They remained standing in their spots and waited patiently. As time passed, blinding sunlight suddenly shone into this world, turning everything bright and white. It then dimmed and vanished. Everyone subconsciously looked around and saw the golden sea once again. They felt a terrifying aura that daunted them from looking straight at. However, unlike before, they were already on an island. Behind them were huge patches of golden strange plants with smiling faces. They didn't seem to have any signs of degeneration or abnormalities, making every member of the City of Silver's reconnaissance team experience the joy of life. We're really outside. It really is a different world. Xiaofan, Candace, and company found it impossible to contain the amazement in their hearts. They immediately confirmed a fact. Elder Derek didn't betray the City of Silver. His cooperation with the outsider really had the goal of leading everyone out of the cursed land. Audiobook, Candace stammered. Thank you. Derek nodded slightly, his back straight. Instead of expressing the apologetic feelings in his heart like Candace, Xiaofan looked around and asked, Audiobook, how should we leave this place? Build a boat? The term building a boat was only limited to the words in their history books, so it sounded rather odd. There doesn't seem to be any materials here that we can use to build a boat. Candace and company immediately inspected the small island, but they couldn't find any trees or plants. Derek shook his head again. There's no need. Wait a little longer. Before he could finish his sentence, he saw a black shadow loom across the horizon. The shadow grew bigger as it quickly followed the safe sea route between the golden spots of light. Not long after, the shadow revealed its outline. It was a hybrid ship with smoke spewing out from it. With all its sails up, the ship hung a blue sea serpent flag. A boat. That's a boat. As Xiaofan, Candace, and company kept their vigilance up, they posed questions. Derek had received some general education at the Tarot Club. He was an experienced person who had seen pictures of various ships. Upon hearing this, he nodded slightly and said, That's right. As they spoke, the ship approached, making the figure standing at the ship's bow gradually become clearer. It was a black-cloaked man with yellow eyebrows and dark blue eyes. He jumped onto the masthead and spread his arms slightly to the people of the City of Silver. Upon seeing this scene, Derek, who had been maintaining his stern attitude, secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He knew that everything was as he had expected. No accidents had happened. Danitz originally wanted to jump off the ship and walk in front of the believers of Mr. Fool to announce that they had been saved, but after glancing at the height of the people from the City of Silver, he silently held himself back. Standing on the masthead, he completely widened his arms and said to Derek and company with a reserved smile, Welcome to the world of light promised by God. In the ancient palace above the fog, Klein sat on the high-backed chair belonging to the Fool. Through the crimson star that symbolized the sun, he watched the entire process of the City of Silver's expedition team's progress. He was constantly prepared to deal with any accidents. When the history, which had been sealed for thousands of years, had combined with the present, with them boarding the ship that originated from the new government of the Rorstad archipelago, and leaving the most dangerous core region of the ruins of the Battle of Gods was over, he heaved a sigh of relief. He put down the staff of the stars and beckoned for 2 items. They were the miracle invoker beyond characteristic that had seeped out of the curtain, and the worm of star from Saint of Secrets Botes. After some thought, Klein reached out his left hand and grabbed a large blob of a dark red liquid from the historical void. This was dark demonic wolf Kotur's blood. There was exactly 300 ml of it, and it was the core supplementary ingredient of the miracle invoker potion. Of course, as a supplementary material, it only had one purpose: to reduce the negative effects of the Beyonder characteristic and reduce the corresponding mysticism influence. Therefore, it didn't matter if it was a historical projection. After all, as long as it could play its role during the potion's concoction and consumption, Klein would have either succeeded or failed in his advancement by the time the historical projection expired. If he failed, he would have broken down into a monster. If he succeeded, he would have become a miracle invoker and gained initial control of the Beyonder characteristic. There was no need for the supplementary ingredients effects. Following that, Klein took out something from the fog of history. It was a ringed worm of time. As he had a strong psychological trauma towards Amon, Klein had chosen to summon a worm of time that Palez Zoroast had once given to him, lest anything unexpected happened. After preparing the materials, He conjured a metal pot and threw the 300 ml of blood from dark demonic wolf into it. Then, he placed the worm of time and sparkling worm of star inside, one after another. The black and red liquid in the cauldron turned dark, its surface becoming translucent and clean. Deep in the cauldron was a dark vortex. Without any hesitation, Klein picked up the Miracle Invoker Beyonder characteristic. It resembled a heart, transparent like a crystal, but there were tiny bubbles emerging from time to time. Every bubble seemed to contain an illusion. When the Beyonder characteristic came into contact with the liquid in the metallic pot, it immediately merged into it, causing the darkness to instantly deepen, making it seem as though countless eyes were opened at the same time. After staring at it for a few seconds, he poured the concocted Miracle Invoker potion into a glass bottle, and he used the bestowment ritual to bring it to the real world. On an uninhabited island in the Sonia Sea, Klein, who had teleported over, looked at the potion in his hand. He suddenly felt a little hesitant. This was because once he became an angel, his body would inevitably be affected by the Beyonder characteristic. He would become colder and crueler, becoming more and more indifferent towards life. He needed sufficient anchors to maintain his humanity. This wasn't something that could be avoided by completely digesting the potion using the acting method he grasped. Back then, Emperor Roselle went through the early stages smoothly, but when he became a Sequence 2 angel, he nearly mutated, almost losing control. As for the angels that he knew, they looked normal on the surface, but he had no idea what they were like when they were hiding behind the scenes. If one could obtain a long life at Sequence 4 and Sequence 3, allowing them to live for more than 1,000 years, a saint really didn't have much motivation to become an angel. Combined with the saying that the higher one's sequence was, the closer one was to the primordial one, he suddenly understood why Demoness of White Katarina only rose from Sequence 4 to Sequence 3 in 1,000 years. But I have no way out. After a brief moment of silence, Klein sighed silently. Nearby threats like Amon and Zeratul, and the approaching days of the apocalypse, as well as the fact that he was previously unable to interfere with the war, these all pushed him towards becoming an angel. He didn't want to simply contribute his strength through donations. His eyes flickered for a few seconds before they returned to their calm state. He picked up the potion bottle and poured the liquid inside into his mouth. Chapter 1268 Miracle Invoker Lord of the Mysteries. The moment the Miracle Invoker potion entered Klein's stomach, it immediately turned into countless cold worms, and swam towards every corner of his body. Suddenly, Klein's mind tore apart, turning into countless small pieces that combined with different worms of spirit. There was no longer any discernible difference between the main body and the auxiliary ones, nor was there any piece that remained dominant. At some point in time, he had entered the grayish-white fog. His half-top hat and long black trench coat quickly disintegrated, and numerous translucent and twisted maggots crawled out. These maggots quickly flew into the depths of the fog of history, each occupying different light fragments, overlapping with the projections of themselves in the historical void. In just 2 or 3 seconds, the spot where Klein stood only had his windbreaker, shirt, top hat, socks, leather shoes, and personal items remaining. They had lost the support of a body and were held, suspended there. Who am I? Who's me? I'm the main body. The various worms of spirit had different but similar thoughts. None of them were willing to return to their body on their own accord. Instead, they felt a strong sense of animosity towards their own kind. It was only because they still had Klein's remnant psyche influence that they hadn't done anything extreme for the time being. At this moment, yet another invisible ripple appeared within the grayish-white fog. This ripple didn't appear by coincidence. It had long existed in the fog, but compared to his collective whole, it appeared indiscernible. However, to a worm of spirit, it was obvious enough. It came from a portion of history that appeared in the present era. It symbolized the fragments of light from the end of the second epoch and portions of the third epoch. They symbolized the 2,000 years that the City of Silver had persisted in the darkness. This forgotten history had a certain clash with the present era. As it formed a corresponding historical void, ripples spread out in an indescribable manner. Such ripples seemed to exert a strong attraction on the worms of spirit, making them peek their heads out from the historical scenes. After a short period of time, one of the worms of spirit crawled out of the light spot from which it occupied, having failed to resist it any further, and also succumbing to the effects of Klein's remnant consciousness. It flew towards the center of the ripples. Right on the heels of that, worms of spirit returned from different spots in the fog of history, and they arrived at the fragments of light formed by the City of Silver's history in the present era. When they reached a certain distance from each other, a strong force of convergence finally appeared, pulling together countless worms of spirit into one. This wasn't an effect that could be produced by 2 or 3 worms of spirit. It needed to have a sufficient number for this phenomenon to happen. And when that portion of the worms of spirit was once again whole, Klein's incomplete consciousness completed the piecing together of his identity. Things finally turned simple. The worms of spirit formed a transparent and gigantic vortex, emitting a strong convergence force that sucked over the remaining, hesitant, nearby worms of spirit that were unwilling to return. After more than 2/3 the worms of spirit returned, a series of transparent tentacles grew out of the vortex. They extended towards the second epoch, the first epoch, and even the prehistoric city of an earlier time. They grabbed the last batch of worms of spirit, one after another, and stuffed them back into the vortex. In less than 20 seconds, the vortex began to extend, turning into a terrifying figure formed from transparent, twisted maggots. An invisible tentacle naturally extended from the figure's body. The tentacles pulled over the windbreaker, top hat, socks, and leather shoes that floated in the fog of history, dressing up the terrifying figure. The figure formed from countless worms of spirit pressed down on the top of his head, causing the translucent feeling on his body to quickly fade, forming a layer of flesh-colored skin. Short black hair and brown eyes grew out. This was the appearance of Klein Moretti, but his height had reached 1.8 meters. With great difficulty, he finally regained consciousness. Before Klein, who had made his soul body whole again, could analyze his present state, he felt 2 abnormalities. One was from the beyonder characteristic that fused with his body. It was a strong, terrifying, high, and mighty will that made it impossible to resist. It seemed to awaken a little as it transmitted one image after another. These images were filled with the mysterious knowledge of a miracle invoker. Some of them were dust that burned into suns, magnificent scenes generated by various celestial bodies. They were filled with a sense of desolateness, coldness, cruelty, madness, superciliousness, and void of any emotional imprints. They quickly assimilated into Klein's spirit, changing his state in an irresistible manner. Another thing that surfaced before Klein's eyes were the crimson stars and the numerous points of resplendent light. The prayers from the members of the Tarot Club emitted from those stars, including Justice, the Hanged Man, and the Moon. Most of the light points echoed with the prayers from the residents of Moon City. Together, they created an image that enveloped the grayish-white fog that looked at the world with pity. It was the image of an extremely high-level and secret existence. The 2 abnormalities reflected on Klein's body, causing his left body to be covered in a grayish-white fog. A slight smile showed on his face that had deep-set eyes. His right body fractured once again, turning into a cluster of translucent squirming maggots and a bloodshot eye that was filled with madness. At that moment, the right side was constantly corroded to the left, and the grayish-white fog was gradually compressed to the extreme. Without any hesitation, he raised his left hand with some difficulty, and he summoned the white bone scepter with blue gems embedded at the top from the fog of history. Circling the sea god's scepter were prayer points of light. With the help of this medium, they were transferred onto Klein's body. Lightning bolts leaped out from the right side of his body as invisible winds and illusory waves swirled around him. This helped the grayish-white fog withstand the contamination from the left, allowing his entire body to come to a delicate balance. At this point, Klein recovered bits and pieces of his humanity and memories, making an initial recovery back to the state before he consumed the potion. He had finally advanced to the level of Sequence 2. He now had the level and status of an angel, a true miracle invoker. Originally, Sapphira Castle was about to be stirred by his change, but with a thought from him, all the abnormalities returned to normal. This proved that he had truly gained control of Sapphira Castle and had become the owner of the Sapphira. As for how much power he could unleash in the real world, he was still unable to estimate it. Phew! Thankfully, I made the history represented by the City of Silver return to reality, and it's powerful enough. If the ritual's effects were a little weaker, I would have lost control and collapsed here today. Klein rubbed his temples and slowly exhaled. He had a better understanding of anchors. The anchor wasn't a tool to help him maintain his humanity. Its main purpose was to form a corresponding understanding, positioning, and image, one that would resist the mental imprint within the beyonder characteristic so as to maintain an intricate balance. Under this balance, Klein could then barely maintain his humanity and not be severely affected by any other influences. In other words, the deities that the believers knew were different from the actual deities. Without the mental imprint within the Beyonder characteristic to resist this influence, the image of the deities in their hearts would gradually envelop the true appearance of the deities. This was also a type of corruption. Only at this moment did Klein realize why the Orthodox deities went from having humanoid statues to simply having sacred emblems. This prevented the believers from having a unified impression of them. This improved the effects they had as anchors to resist the remnant mental effects of the primordial one, whilst also not subtly changing their bodies. As for why the Orthodox deities took 1 or 2 epochs to figure this out, Klein quickly thought of 2 reasons. Firstly, he had the past images of the Orthodox deities for comparison. He had Emperor Rosel's diary as reference, and the corresponding mysticism knowledge to provide inspiration. Secondly, the mythical creature form of a seer was all about being split and separated. It made him very sensitive to such influences. This sort of balance isn't too stable, and it often tilts to a certain extent. This will cause problems with my condition's stability. From time to time, I will end up scaring the people around me. Fortunately, this can be predicted ahead of time, so it can effectively be avoided. Also, when I'm in a delicate balance, I should try my best to show my humanity to strengthen my self-awareness. This is commonly chosen by many angels. The Rose school of thought's indulgence can be considered to be doing the same. But Amon's believers are all himself. How does he maintain the balance? Could it be that the mythical creature that's born with a uniqueness itself has the will of the primordial one fused with him? Amon is long accustomed to being half crazy. No, that's not his normal state. It's the image that arose from the referendum of every Amon. That's a line of thought. I can form a marionette group and make every marionette a believer of the fool. In addition, with my truest appearance as a deity, this can effectively provide the best anchor. It's no wonder that Zeratul and the dark demonic wolf don't have any believers. Once the residents of the city of Silver switch faiths to the fool, I can consider separating the embodiment of sea god from myself, making it no longer one of my anchors. This greatly contradicts the beliefs and understanding of my other believers. They can't truly be united. Klein instantly thought of a lot of matters, and after his thoughts finished racing, he returned above the gray fog. When he became a miracle invoker and became a him, as well as becoming the owner of Sapphira Castle, he no longer needed to take 4 steps counterclockwise, recite the incantations, or get all the members of the Tarot Club to pray. He could now easily return. However, he seemed incapable of expressing the full powers of Sapphira Castle. He could only enter with his spirit body, unable to bring his physical body along. After sitting in the seat belonging to the fool, Klein wasn't in a rush to check on the changes in Sapphira Castle. He first confirmed his advancement and digested the mysticism knowledge he had just obtained. Yes, the beyonder powers of a miracle invoker come from 2 different aspects. One is the greater utilization of the fog of history, and the other is the newly enhanced core power of wishes. The improved utilization of the fog of history includes several abilities. 1. Using the help of past worms of spirit to revive myself, but it will be ineffective after 4 times. I've already used it 3 times, so I can only revive 1 more time as a miracle invoker. Once I advance to an attendant of mysteries, there should be a corresponding increase in this number. 2. I am able to exert some influence on the future, causing the probability of certain things to increase or shrink to a certain extent. It's equivalent to interfering with the fate of the target. Haha, I'm finally wielding good luck. However, this aspect is still different from the die of probability. 3. Summoning from the historical void is no longer limited to just items. It can be extended to certain scenes I'm familiar with. Yes, the total number of items and scenes I can summon now is 9, but only 3 of them can be at the angel level. Wishes already make it a standard deity's ability, but it's a little strange. Only by fulfilling someone's wish can I fulfill my own wish. A small wish has to be granted before a bigger wish can be gradually granted. Chapter 1269. The Power of Wishes. Klein originally believed that the wishes ability could be used freely as long as it didn't exceed a limit. To his surprise, the effects didn't solely come from the beyonder characteristic. To put it simply, a miracle invoker needed to seek out and satisfy all kinds of wishes before they could make wishes and personally grant them during battles, turning the corresponding situation into a reality. Furthermore, at the very beginning, the wishes that Klein could fulfill were small and trivial. He had to accumulate them one step at a time before he could create a true miracle. He couldn't do as he wished. Yes, if I want to use dark demonic Wolf Koter's wishing method to teleport, I would have to first satisfy many similar wishes. It comes from others, from simple to the more difficult wishes. I do have a solution in this aspect. I can use Creeping Hunger and the Staff of the Stars to fulfill the corresponding wishes. There's no need to start from the simplest. Speaking of which, the wishes ability resembled using an anchor. It's a type of collective ability. Since the faithful's understanding of deities can effectively affect the deities and become a certain definition for them, helping them resist the primordial one's mental imprint in the beyonder characteristics. In the same way, similar wishes of different creatures with spirituality can indeed help me create a miracle. This might be related to the sea of collective subconscious. It's not scientific enough, but it's fairly mystical. After figuring out the situation of the wishes ability, Klein had a preliminary idea of how to act as a miracle invoker. That was to walk the real world, and as the most powerful magician, he would allow different people to witness a miracle and satisfy their wishes. It's no wonder the dark demonic wolf's original title was the God of Wishes. When such a belief spreads, many people would use the method of praying to voice out their wishes, allowing the miracle invoker to respond from afar. This makes acting a lot simpler. It can save a lot of time, but the problem is that the potion's name is Miracle Invoker and not the God of Wishes. The role one needs to act as is that of a deity, so there are still some differences between the two. I can roam the various countries and let different people witness miracles while using the fool's name to satisfy some of the believer's wishes. I'll then see which would be more effective. However, this isn't the only way to act as a miracle invoker. I still need to take the initiative to create a miracle in real life, leaving behind the corresponding legend. Klein tapped the edge of the long mottled table with his finger as he silently muttered to himself. During his scrutiny of his own body moments ago, he realized that he had digested more than half of the potion. After all, he had created miracles several times. He had even been revived 3 times. Of course, Klein believed that it was very coincidental because he could create a miracle and act in advance, mainly because of Sapphira Castle. It's as though someone set me up. Klein sighed inwardly as he didn't feel relaxed. Instead, he became more serious and wary. As for who arranged it, he had a suspect. The mysteries that the ancient sun god mentioned, the existence suspected to be the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. And what made Klein even more puzzled was that when he advanced to sequence 2 and became an angel, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings didn't appear. Neither did he awaken in his body after he experienced the qualitative changes. This was completely different from what he had expected. There weren't any traces of it at all. Apart from the initial mental corruption from the primordial one, something that will definitely arrive, it should be the spiritual imprint left behind in the beyonder characteristic. Could it be that the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings has completely perished despite making all the arrangements? He doesn't have the ability to influence me and revive from my body? If that's the case, then I have to thank him. Klein teased himself and stood up with caution and puzzlement. With this thought, he appeared on the grayish-white cloud and arrived in front of the strange door of light. Glancing at the transparent cocoons hanging above his head, Klein slowly extended his right hand and touched the door of light. When he truly became the owner of this mysterious space, he had clearly realized a fact when he returned. It was that the strange door of light was core to this place. It was Sapphira Castle in the truest sense of the word, and this boundless void belonged to the divine kingdom that Sapphira Castle came with. As for the ancient palace, the 22 high-backed chairs, the long bronze table, and the items that the members of the Tarot Club usually conjured, Klein believed that they were a manifestation of the wish's power. In other words, back when he wanted a palace and a gathering place, Sapphira Castle had satisfied his wish. And because he didn't have a specific description of his wish, Sapphira Castle had extracted scenes from similar wishes in the past. Klein suspected that the ancient Greek palace and the 22 high-backed chairs were conjured by the existence that was suspected to be the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. As he moved inch by inch, Klein pressed his right hand against the edge of the door of light. This time, his palm didn't directly pierce through it as he touched something corporeal. Suddenly, the door of light began to tremble slightly, along with the hanging cocoons, which contained human figures. Above the grayish-white fog, there was only an ancient palace in the endless void. Numerous skyscrapers rose rapidly. Cars appeared one after another as pedestrians suddenly appeared. In one of the residential districts, in an ordinary rental apartment, there was a window illuminated by an energy-saving bulb that wasn't bright enough. This was what the old metropolis from before the first epoch looked like before the disaster. This was the place Klein had once lived. Looking around, Klein sighed, letting everything disappear before his eyes. Indeed, I can preliminarily use Sapphira Castle's powers. By relying on this point, I would already be close to the level of a king of angels when I'm above the gray fog. Furthermore, the authority I show isn't only that of miracles, but also a portion of a planeswalker and a Trojan horse of destiny. If I were to return to the real world, apart from being able to further utilize Sapphira Castle's aura, I would be able to directly obtain a portion of its powers. This should allow me to form a nascent divine kingdom and reach sequence 1 in here. Unfortunately, in reality, I can't use the high-level Beyonder powers of Marauder and Apprentice. As Klein evaluated the situation, he cast his gaze at the transparent cocoons hanging above the door of light. He ultimately didn't release the people inside, because they would definitely be used by Amon. After confirming everything, Klein returned to the ancient palace and sat on the high-backed chair of the fool. He remembered that some of his memories were sealed, so he summoned the piece of paper from the junk pile. Upon opening it, Klein's eyes narrowed and his lips quivered as he muttered to himself, "Great Old Ones, outer deities, cosmos, creator, above the sequences. So that's how it is." At that moment, he completely understood the rationale behind the battle of gods that had just ended. He understood the possible origins of the apocalypse and understood why the 7 deities had given tacit consent to the birth of a Black Emperor, and their indifference towards the Red Angel evil spirits returned to the real world. From the information provided by Leonard and Miss Justice, Lone ultimately clinched victory. It's very likely that the god of combat has already perished. In other words, the goddess has succeeded, but I don't know what other conditions she is lacking to become a great old one that's above the sequences. I'll summon a Rhodes later to inquire about the details of the situation and grasp the present situation. With this in mind, Klein recalled the various details of the past and connected many matters together. Earth Mother, whose identity had been unknown, had succeeded in acting as the giant Queen Omabella for thousands of years without being exposed. It's impossible without the help of concealment. Man, the goddess has been plotting something like this from the 3rd epoch or even the end of the 2nd epoch. Why does this feel more terrifying than Amon? Yes, concealment can only hide traces of various aspects. It can mislead the corresponding prying and divination attempts, making it impossible for a person to don a disguise. For the Earth Mother to be able to pretend to be Omabella, without being suspected by the god of combat, there may be other factors involved. For example, a particular existence helped her steal the fate of the giant queen? At that time, there was only one person who had the authority to participate in this matter. The ancient sun god, the second creator, Amon and Adam's father. If that's the case, the goddess and the ancient sun god should have cooperated from a long time ago. Until the new creator awakened the primordial one in him. This can also explain why the first existence that Dark Angel Sasra sought out was the goddess. Of course, concealment is also an important factor. Ever since I obtained the uniqueness of the death pathway, the goddess has been setting up the trap. On the one hand, she wants me to take over the Numinous Episcopate's artificial death faction in Backlund to pretend that everything is normal. On the other hand, she didn't deal with the people or objects that might have discovered something was amiss, resulting in the leak of information. This way, in the eyes of the god of combat, the situation became the goddess trying her best to conceal the secret, but due to her lack of control while digesting the uniqueness, she was unable to do so. After that, be it tacitly acquiescing George III becoming the Black Emperor, or the aid provided to me in destroying his ritual, the goddess doesn't care about the final outcome of the matter. Her main goal was to show that she didn't have the ability to directly interfere with the real world, further deepening the impression that she was attempting to accommodate the uniqueness of the death pathway. There are a lot of similar details. To the god of combat, as he had a deeper understanding of the goddess, he definitely wasn't fully convinced in regards to this matter. Therefore, he chose to take it safe by first shaking the goddess's anchors, allowing her psyche to be corrupted. To him, this definitely made her divert a large portion of her efforts to resist the corruption before he chose to attack the goddess together with Earth Mother. And it's because of this that he fell into the goddess's trap. In other words, The true goal of the goddess's various actions wasn't to lay a trap with the uniqueness of the death pathway, but to let the other deities place their focus on this matter, and ignore the possibility that there was something wrong with Earth Mother. How terrifying! Klein sighed from the bottom of his heart. He felt that Adam and Amon were probably inferior to the goddess when it came to horror. He shook his head, conjured a pen and paper and wrote his warning, "Always remember you are a he, not a he." Chapter 1270 Visiting on the Ship, Sea God. The members of the City of Silver, like Lievel, Candace, and other City of Silver scouts, were seated on chairs that didn't suit their size. They watched the dwarfs around them warily. Of course, they knew that these were normal humans. After all, they all knew that their exaggerated heights were brought about by potions, but they still felt that the people on the ship were too short, including Lord Danitz, who called himself an oracle. After all, in the City of Silver, other than children, the residents who had yet to reach Sequence 6 had an average height exceeding 1.8 meters. Among them, there were no lack of Sequence 9 beyonders who were more than 2 meters tall. The slight sway of the boat made the half-giants feel somewhat uncomfortable, but their strong physique helped them quickly overcome this influence. And the contrast between the sea and the lone boat beyond the window made them unable to contain their unease, fear, and anxiety. It was like the first time they participated in an expedition. The surroundings seemed to have monsters lurking in the darkness that could attack them at any moment. At that moment, Danitz entered the room that had been transformed into a dining mess. He smiled at the tall, wary, cautious, strangely dressed people who sat stiffly and said, "Your food is ready. Next, you can enjoy your food as you please. By the way, don't forget what I told you just now. These waters are very dangerous. There's no need to get up. You can stay in your seats." When Danitz saw that the young elder who introduced himself as Derek, and the other half-giants, wished to get up and speak to him in the most polite manner, he hurriedly lowered his hands and stopped their uncivilized behavior. "If I was as tall as them, I would have already begun mocking the people around me," Danitz muttered as he clapped his hands, signaling the crew to send the food in. A strong fragrance immediately drilled into the noses of Derek and the other residents of the City of Silver. It was the scent that they were familiar with when roasting meat-type mushrooms, but there was an additional indescribable smell. It was rather strange and slightly stimulating. The smell was so alluring that Lievel, Candace, and the rest began to have saliva secrete from their mouths as their stomachs churned to attention. "Desi-style roasted meat," Danitz said as he pointed at a crew member who walked in. He held a large steel plate that had a piece of roasted golden brown piece of meat that glistened with oil. Evenly spread across its surface were fennel, basil, and other spices. Steak, pan-fried fish, white bread, seafood soup, and light beer. Danitz introduced each and every dish, smiling when he was done. "Don't worry about anything. Feel free to indulge. We have plenty of food reserves." With that said, he glanced at the half-giants, who seemed eager to stand up. His most pressing concern was to capture Amon and retrieve the first blasphemy slate. Strictly speaking, this is a family drama. Klein lampooned inwardly. He grabbed creeping hunger from the air, and he wore the sealed artifact that had accompanied him for a long time on his left palm. His body quickly turned transparent and disappeared. In the saturated and stacked spirit world, Klein rapidly moved through the indescribable figures as he approached the coordinates that represented Backlund. Suddenly, he came to a stop and stood in the chaotic void, looking at the 7 pure lights that occupied the highest spot in the spirit world. Previously, due to my low sequence, I didn't dare wander the spirit world. Nor did I attempt to visit the 7 lights that had shown their kindness towards me. Now, it seems it's time we meet. They're the embodiments of all kinds of knowledge, and they've lived in the spirit world for countless years. They might know quite a bit of secrets. Just as Klein finished his thoughts, a light suddenly appeared in front of him. An elder in an orange robe appeared. This old man was plump and had a short white beard. He looked very amiable. He looked at Klein and nodded with a smile. "Your Excellency, please allow me to introduce myself. You should remember me. I am Orange Light Hilarion. The last time I saw you, you were very thin." As Klein lampooned, he asked with a smile, "You seem to have predicted that I would visit you?" Hilarion didn't hide anything as he smiled frankly. The spirit world itself is interwoven with all sorts of information. Some come from the past, some come from the present, and some indicate a certain future.
Whether it's divination or prophecy, most of the methods are actually using the spirit world, followed by the prying into the secrets of fate.
What orange light meant was that since Klein was in the spirit world and had the intention of visiting, and was prepared to take action to do so, there would definitely be a corresponding exchange of information. This allowed the 7 lights who control the spirit world to a certain extent to sense it and make a prophecy. Klein wasn't surprised at all.
He nodded slightly and said, "Other than you, who else wants to meet me?"
He had originally planned on using honorifics, but considering the 7 lights' attitude and the way Orange Light addressed him, he gave up on this plan, so as to maintain the status of the proxy to Sapphira Castle. Orange Light Hilarion immediately smiled and said, "All of them." "Your Excellency, you don't mind, do you?" Klein shook his head and replied politely, "Of course. It will be my honor." As soon as he finished speaking, different colors of light rose up around Hilarion, transforming into different old men. "Your Excellency, please allow me to do the introductions." When Orange Light saw Klein nod, he pointed at an elder in a red robe and said, "He is Red Light Ire Moria, the one who previously answered my question." Klein immediately smiled and showed his gratitude and friendliness. In turn, Hilarion introduced Yellow Light Venathan, Blue Light Kuthumi, Green Light Serapis, Indigo Light Yesas, and Violet Light Saint Germain. Yellow Light Venathan. Is this the one who made an apocalyptic prophecy regarding the Abraham's ancestor? Klein looked at the thin, long-bearded elder in a lemon-yellow robe and said with a smile, "Let's sit down and have a chat." As he spoke, he raised his right hand. Dark red flames lit up in the surrounding area. It came from a fireplace burning high-quality charcoal. These flames immediately lit up a reclining chair, a grayish-yellow carpet, cupboards, sofas, coffee tables, cast sculptures, white porcelain teacups, and other items, forming a classic Backland-styled activity room. "Please take a seat." Klein faced the 7 lights as he smiled and pointed at the sofa and high-back chairs. After the 7 lights settled down, Klein sat on the reclining chair, picked up a teacup, and said in a natural tone, "To be honest, I've always wanted to pay a visit to all 7 of you, but I couldn't find a chance. Now, I've finally fulfilled this wish." "This has also been our wish." Orange Light seemed to be the brightest and most outgoing person among the 7 lights. He immediately responded on behalf of all his companions. I have the feeling that I've fulfilled someone's wish." Klein was delighted as he probed, "Might I ask, what do you know about the cosmos, or should I say, the great old ones and outer deities?" Indigo Light Yesas, who wore a linen robe and looked relatively young, answered seriously, "Your Excellency, the great old ones eyeing our world are Mother Goddess of Depravity, Mother Tree of Desire, Son of Chaos, Primordial Hunger, Ring of Comeuppance, Supernova Dominator, Inextinguishable Ravings, Monarch of Decay, and High-Dimensional Overseer." Isn't that a little too many? Klein was a little stunned when he heard that. Chapter 1271 7 Lights. Upon hearing Indigo Light Yesas's reply, Klein's mind tensed up as he recalled the Crimson Moon, the Brown Planet, the Scarlet Planet, the Blue Planet, and Gold Planet. He felt like they were looking down at him from above with their eyes. Silently, a connection was established. The impending fatal corruption made all of Klein's worms of spirit feel uneasy. As an angel in control of Sapphira Castle, Klein had many ways to sever this connection. Firstly, he could use the status and strength of a complete mythical creature. Secondly, he could suppress his anchors, using the mental imprint the primordial one left in him to offset it. Thirdly, he could use the aura of Sapphira Castle that he could now utilize one step further. Without any hesitation, he chose the simplest and most convenient method to not leave behind any hidden dangers. A grayish-white fog appeared around him as all the celestial body projections in his mind vanished. After being stunned for a second, Klein organized his words and said, "There are that many outer deities?" Indigo Light Yesas symbolized the domain of prayers. He touched the ruby ring on his right hand and nodded. Ever since the oldest one awakened and split apart, the most powerful outer deities in the entire universe gathered around this tiny solar system. Some of them wished to retrieve their spherote and characteristics that had been ripped from them, and were attracted here. Some of them have the hope of getting neighboring spherote and high-level characteristics which they can accommodate. Oldest one. The 7 lights addressed the original creator as the oldest one, and not the primordial one. In terms of the name's meaning, there isn't much difference. Klein deliberated and asked, spherote and characteristics that were ripped and attracted over?
He could understand the rest of the words indigo light had mentioned, and he had even made some speculation towards such matters.
There was just one point that caught him by surprise. Blue light Kuthumi, who was a symbol of the domain of cogitation and used love and wisdom as a characteristic of his body, explained kindly, "Your Excellency, you shouldn't be unfamiliar with the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics."
Seeing Klein nod, the thick-bearded elder with a sapphire tied around his forehead continued, "This isn't just a law for the sequence pathways.
It's also suitable for describing the spherote and the characteristics related to the outer deities, especially the ones that were directly nurtured and created from the oldest one. For example, the mother goddess of depravity, son of chaos, and the mother tree of desire. As for the other outer deities, we aren't too sure."
In short, the three great old ones who lost a portion of their spherote and characteristics are most concerned and proactive when it comes to invading the real world.
They have been trying to influence the spirit world and corrupt us. Klein nodded slightly and asked in a confirmation-seeking tone. "In other words, a portion of the current 22 pathways and 9 spherote belong to the outer deities?"
"Yes."
The amethyst-wielding Saint Germain, who symbolized the domain of ritualistic magic, took the opportunity to answer. When the total number of 22 pathways and the 9 spherote was reached, everything finally reached a balance.
This might be the mysticism connection that originated from the oldest one. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "What are they exactly?"
Saint Germain,
whose face was suffused with a faint purple glow, making him look rather mysterious, said, "For example, the moon and the earth pathway both belong to the mother goddess of depravity.
She is an existence that stands atop all the outer deities.
Even after a portion of her Sapphira, that is, the brood hive, was ripped from her, that remains the case.
She is the sovereign of all the feminine forces in the entire universe." Just as Saint Germain said that, Green Light Serapis suddenly laughed. In fact, after carefully analyzing the 22 pathways, you'll discover that the moon and earth pathways are the two most contradictory ones. Heh. The Demonis pathway represents the oldest one's feminine side. The Red Priest pathway represents the masculine side. This happens to form a deformed aspect of balance, but the moon and earth can also make beyonders of the corresponding pathways turn into feminine creatures at high sequences. There are no pathways that balance it.
Seeing Klein wince his eyebrows, Green Light, who had the long hair of an artist, added with a smile, "The earth pathway sequence 2 is Desolate Matriarch, and the moon pathway sequence 1 is called Beauty Goddess.
Therefore, the sanguine only have queens and no male princes." Then was the ancient goddess, Lilith, originally a male and a female? Klein mumbled inwardly and asked thoughtfully, "The primordial moon is the mother goddess of depravity?"
"Yes."
Red Light Ire Moria, who was wearing a diamond crown, nodded in a dignified manner. "She occupies the moon, and through her own level and influence on the brood hive and the uniqueness of 2 pathways, she has gradually infiltrated into reality. The primordial moon is her manifestation in this world."
After saying that, Ire Moria paused and said, "Her full title is Mother Goddess of Depravity, Origin of Evil, the Indestructible, and the Brood Hive of Filth."
Klein recalled the exaggerated reaction of the moon when he first learned of the secret of the cosmos. He suddenly felt a chill as he hurriedly asked, "The devil and prisoner pathway come from the mother tree of desire?" Yellow Light Venathan, who was wearing a lemon-yellow robe, sighed.
"Yes, her full name is the Mother Tree of Desire, Father to Devils, Perpetual Blatherer, and the Heartless God. Therefore, she had seized the opportunity when something happened to the chained god, easily achieving her goal of corruption."
"Mother, father,
Is that fellow a man or a woman?"
Yes, to an existence at this level, it's normal for there to be no distinction between genders. Different incarnations have different images. Heh, she even wanted to bear a child for me.
From the present state of the chained god, if I had been caught, I'd probably be the one bearing the child.
Then, the child will inherit Sapphira Castle, allowing the mother tree of desire to indirectly corrupt and control this Sapphira. From this angle, perhaps the prisoner pathway's desire of indulgence is the proper way of acting. However, this correct path leads to the outer deity, so temperance is still the better one. Klein frowned slightly as he raised a question he had guessed before, hoping to get an answer. Since there are so many outer deities, why haven't they entered our world yet?
From what Klein had learned to date, he could guess that, Even if it were only the mother goddess of depravity and the mother tree of desire, the outer deities could easily resolve existences like the former 7 deities, the true creator, and the primordial demoness.
The plump orange-light Hilarion smiled and said, "All our suffering comes from the oldest one. All our luck comes from the oldest one as well." Not only did he leave behind his spirit, will, branding and corruption, but he also left behind the spherote, characteristics, and power. The remnants of his power formed an invisible barrier outside the planet, preventing the outer deities from directly invading it. However, with the passage of time, his consciousness and powers haven't truly been revived, and his will and powers are fading. At the end of the 4th epoch, this reached a very serious state. The invisible barrier produced cracks, and the 7 deities had no choice but to move their divine kingdoms into the astral world to mend the cracks. It's no wonder that the true deities from the 4th epoch could walk the land, but they rarely descended in the 5th epoch. Klein immediately came to a realization and asked, when the oldest one's will and powers decline further, the invisible barrier will vanish and usher in the apocalypse? Orange Light Hilarion, who had been smiling all this while, glanced at Yellow Light Venathan. His expression immediately turned serious. Yes. When the time comes, the mother goddess of depravity, the mother tree of desire, and the son of chaos and all the other outer deities would invade this planet. Even if the goddess becomes a great old one, she wouldn't be able to withstand so many of them. The other sequence 0 deities would be able to tie down 1 or 2 outer deities together, and that would be considered a miracle. It would take 9 to fight 1, or even more. Klein's scalp tingled as he once again experienced the meaning of despair. No wonder it was called the apocalypse. With his upheaval in emotions, he immediately felt the primordial one's mental imprint strengthen, and more of it had eroded what the anchors had fixed in place. Klein quickly calmed himself down and allowed the fragile balance to reappear again. This is the reason why the corruption from underground will naturally dissipate as long as one doesn't approach it or resist. Klein recalled some of the mysticism knowledge he had previously grasped. Your Excellency, you're completely right. Orange Light Hilarion gave an affirmative answer. Klein immediately made other connections. Does that mean that the closer one is to the apocalypse, the easier it is for one to advance? This is because the primordial one's will is fading.
His awakening will become difficult, to the point of not waking up again. Red Light, Ire Moria thought for a moment and said, "This is the reason why the 7 deities have only waited until recently to set their sights on above the sequences before taking concrete action.
However, the oldest ones will can dissipate, but his spirit will remain forever. It won't be erased unless the entire universe returns to the singularity.
Therefore, the corresponding high-level existences still have the possibility of having the oldest one awaken into them. The higher the level, the greater the possibility.
The corresponding influence and corruption will become more serious. The extraordinary power and the curse that can never be broken are always 2 sides of the same coin." Klein sighed. Forcefully suppressing a problem that wasn't at his level, he asked, "Do you know the potion formula for Attendant of Mysteries?" The amethyst-wielding Saint Germain replied, "There's a corresponding mystery attached to such knowledge. It's not in the spirit world, but according to our observations, the Attendant of Mysteries ritual should be closely related to the spirit world." Orange Light Hilarion immediately smiled at Klein. "Your Excellency, if you require anything, we'll provide our full support. This fervor makes me a little afraid. Just like facing a Rhodes." Klein nodded slightly and prepared to change the topic.
After some consideration, he asked solemnly, "Do you know of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings?"
He translated the title using Elvish. The 7 lights immediately fell silent. They looked at each other and didn't reply for a while. After a few seconds, Orange Light Hilarion sighed. "We still can't be sure if you're him." Chapter 1272, Spring the King of Spacetime, Beacon of Destiny, Embodiment of Sapphira Castle, Dominator of the Spirit World, Lord of the Mysteries. So the mysteries mentioned by the ancient sun god refers to the Lord of the Mysteries. Klein silently repeated the titles as he felt the trauma in his heart increase. He immediately thought of a question and hesitated before saying, "Based on what I know, a long time before the last civilization ended, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings had already appeared." After the 7 lights exchanged looks, the thin yellow light Venathan, who was translucent like other spirit world creatures, sighed and said, We weren't aware of that. When the previous civilization came to an end, the 7 lights from before had been wiped out when the oldest one awoke. We were the pure lights that were born from the spirit world during the first epoch. However, we have some guesses about the great ruler above the spirit world. Perhaps this can answer your questions. Klein perked up and wore an attentive look.
Yellow Light Venathan continued. We suspect that some of the great old ones that were active in the first epoch were outer deities who had been directly attracted to this planet.
Some of them came alive as spherotes.
In other words, some great old ones were equivalent to the oldest one, embodiments of the different personalities he split into.
Whatever separates will definitely converge, and whatever converges will definitely separate. This description isn't limited to beyonder characteristics, but also refers to the oldest one himself. As most of the spherote and characteristics are from this supreme existence, there are natural inclinations of convergence.
And the oldest one is the amalgamation of all the contradictions in the universe.
Once the spherote and characteristics are gathered, it will almost certainly separate. Is this the crux and origins of the law of convergence of beyonder characteristics? The genie is an unlucky outer deity who got attracted to this world, only to encounter the Lord of the Mysteries? Klein nodded slightly and didn't interrupt. He patiently waited for Yellow Light to share their guesses.
Dressed in a lemon-yellow robe, Venathan glanced at Klein and said, perhaps the oldest one had already had an inclination towards separating while asleep. Therefore, his mind was split into different parts. He used different titles to secretly interfere with the real world and prepare for the separation that was bound to happen once his body woke up. For example, God Almighty or the Celestial Worthy. A reasonable guess. It can explain many of my doubts. Klein immediately felt enlightened. He deliberated and said, in other words, you believe that the great ruler above the spirit world was a part of the oldest one. To a certain extent, he is equivalent to the oldest one?
That's right. Orange Light Hilarion gave an affirmative response before comforting Klein. Based on the present situation, the great ruler is also the same as the rest of the oldest one. His will and powers have faded over time. Your Excellency, regardless of you being him or not, it doesn't hinder you from putting up a certain level of resistance. Keep what's left of your humanity, and reach a particular balance with him. Heh. Separation is inevitable. What kind of consolation is that? Klein couldn't help but lampoon. Then he realized a problem. Since the oldest one dissociated into different parts, the mental imprint in the body of a high-sequence beyonder of the corresponding pathway should also belong to the different great old ones. If the primordial one which awoke in the ancient sun god's body is the God Almighty as described by the 7 lights, then who would it be when the primordial one's mental imprint begins eating at me? The answer to this question was very obvious. Without needing to think, Klein could answer it. The Lord of the Mysteries, the dominator of the spirit world, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. In other words, it wasn't that the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings hadn't left any traces as he had previously believed. He had already awoken in Klein's body. Fact. Klein's entire body turned cold. He inexplicably experienced what the ancient sun god previously felt. At that moment, he was very worried that one day, he would unknowingly become another person, becoming the resurrected Lord of the Mysteries, the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. However, an awakening of this level is similar to what other angels have encountered. It's not as strong and irresistible as I had imagined it to be. This is because I'm different from the ancient sun god. I wasn't born with the status of an angel, or even in control of a uniqueness. I advanced step by step, and I was able to complete the digestion in different stages? If that's the case, I have to thank the grayish-white fog that sent the curtain into the forsaken land of the gods. Perhaps, this involved the help of a particular or several existences. Yes, that's still not right. I've already become the owner of Sapphira Castle. There's no reason for the corruption and contamination I suffer to be the same as other Sequence 2 angels. Klein secretly shook his head. He didn't raise the corresponding question to the 7 lights. To him, this was one of his core secrets. He definitely couldn't let other existences know what his current state was like. He raised his right hand and placed it to his mouth. He coughed lightly. I roughly understand. After chatting with the 7 lights, Klein stood up and bowed. Thank you for your answers. It was our pleasure. May your Excellency return to the throne of the great ruler above the spirit world as quickly as possible. The 7 lights stood up at the same time, giving him a warm response. Are they trying to curse me?
Klein teased himself as he politely sent away the 7 pure lights.
Following that, he activated teleport once again, and returned to a secluded alley in Backland. Pressing his top hat on his head, Klein strolled down the street. The first thing that caught his eye was the crowd of all kinds of people and the hustle and bustle that formed a heat wave. Some people were wearing linen clothes, sawing down abnormally tall trees in groups of about 4 people. Some of them formed a team, busy repairing the streets and houses that didn't suffer too much damage. Some held desi pies and sweet iced tea in their hands, rushing past him, as though they were rushing to their workplace. Some of them rode cargo carriages, carrying food, meat, and vegetables, all heading in different directions. Although most of these people wore simple clothes with plenty of visible stitches, and there were still signs of numbness and pain on their faces, the vitality their bodies exuded seemed to interweave into a light of hope before Klein's eyes. They were tenaciously brimming with life. They were like grass that tried their best to tear through stones after a cold winter. Klein slowed down his steps and gazed deeply at the bustling scene. Although he hadn't seen the tragedy in the later stages of the war, he had learned plenty from Miss Justice and Leonard. Furthermore, he had previously been traveling in the even darker and more repressed forsaken land of the gods. It was inevitable that he felt some uncontrollable emotions. Spring had arrived. Klein's expression gradually relaxed as the corners of his mouth curled up. He walked through the streets and alleys that were rebuilt after the war, and he walked all the way to St. Samuel Cathedral in Northborough. The square was filled with potholes. The workers were doing the first round of cleaning. A small flock of pigeons had returned and landed in this once familiar area. Klein looked around but didn't find any hawkers. All he could do was use historical projections as food and scatter it across the floor. As the pigeons flew over, he crossed the square and entered the cathedral where the bell tower was being repaired. He sat in the front pew of the prayer hall. Looking at the sacred emblem that was the crimson moon surrounded by stars, Klein took off his hat and clasped his hands. He closed his eyes in this tranquil environment. He gradually calmed down, feeling as if he was really praying. At this moment, Leonard, with much longer black hair and darker green eyes, walked down the aisle in a black trench coat and red gloves. He came near him and sat on the pew 2 spots from him and began praying. In the absolute silence, Klein opened his eyes, stood up, put on his hat, and walked past Leonard. When he reached the door, Leonard slowly got up and followed behind. One after the other, they arrived at a corner of the square not long after. Leonard looked at the few pigeons on the ground and seemingly mumbled to himself, "I'm already a high-ranking deacon of the Nighthawks. In another 2 days, I'll return to the Holy Cathedral for some studies, as well as obtain a corresponding holy artifact." In the final stages of the war, he advanced at the front lines to sequence 4 Night Watcher. "You don't seem to be too happy." Klein, who was standing beside Leonard, didn't turn his head as he looked at the pigeons. Leonard laughed self-deprecatingly. "I have no right to be unhappy. I was just thinking that the Battle of Gods ended so quickly, and the result was unexpected. Does it mean that the previous defeat and the difficulties that everyone suffered were nothing but bait? Before today, I shared your views. I was also puzzled and frustrated, but now, I'm a little lost. This might have been a necessity." Klein didn't hide his feelings. Leonard fell silent for 2 seconds before looking down at the pigeon that was prancing around him. "That's what Old Man said too." Without waiting for Klein to say another word, he turned his head and glanced at his former colleague. "You've become an angel?" Pallas Zoroast had told him that what Klein had done previously was perhaps to prepare for his advancement to an angel. "Yes." Klein nodded slightly. "But there isn't any glory or power in this. Only pain, curses, and responsibility." "Why?" Leonard subconsciously asked. Klein didn't reply immediately. He looked down at the shadow by his feet and turned to walk out the square. After a few steps, he turned his back to Leonard and muttered to himself, "You should still remember that sentence. We are guardians, but also a bunch of miserable wretches that are constantly fighting against threats and madness." Leonard was taken aback. After a few seconds, he turned to look at Klein, but all he could see was Klein's back, which was just about to disappear around the corner of the street. He was wearing a half-top hat and a black trench coat. With a whoosh, the pigeons on the ground flew up into the light blue sky. "You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.